And I'm actually less worried about him now. The Broken Man escalation actually covers pretty much the entire south of the map right now.
Ooh,
Until it hits the
guys'
bone dancers.
Yeah, for your guys' bone dancers. Hopefully they'll help kill them.
Well, so I guess one of our guys found a bone dancer source hex today and knocked it out. So
Yeah, chances are it'll just respawn somewhere else up in the middle of the map, and we'll have to go hunt it down and kill it again. We've killed like 8 of those.
Well, the thing is that if you kill the source hex and then you focus on killing off the, surrounding infected hexes, or at least break a link somewhere, you could probably then make it more manageable.
The problem with the Broken Men is there's actually 2 or 3 source hexes feeding the same type, and then they collided in the middle like a perfect storm.
yeah,
Well, the real issue is that there's absolutely no reason to clear escalation hexes right now, unless it's tier 2. The rewards are tiny.
Actually, for me, even clearing a tier 1 escalation is still something, because 1, you rack up the kills, which is good.
But, I mean, you can grind achievements anywhere. I mean, it's good, but it's not. I'm not going to go clear out half the map of goblins for achievements.
Yeah, in fact, actually, around Talengard, we got a rapidly building goblin escalation. Yeah, goblins.
Bite marks?
We were talking about.
Or charred. Yeah, I think they're charred.
We started talking about escalations, and Bob joins us.
I like Chard. They don't have horrible, horrible dogs that can immobilize you for 24 hours.
Hey, Bob, can you hear us?
Hey, Bob. Drink.
Hey, Lisa.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool.
Bob.
Hey, Hoffman, I want to tell you one thing. This is, I convinced Steven to do this next week, so you have your person for next week, Stephen Cheney.
Perfect. Tork, are you working on the audio over there? Who's pretending to be Bob?
I'm pretty sure that's what he's doing. I see him in the other room there.
That's fine. Welcome back from Vegas.
And I hope you enjoyed me putting up that Linux guide, Lisa.
No worries.
You and your Linux.
Hey, Linux is a growing market, dude.
I think you have stock in Linux.
I don't, because it's open source. No one owns it.
I was hearing more about it a few years ago, but then it sort of died off lately.
Don't start the Linux discussions. That is not on topic for today.
Well, the topic hasn't started yet.
Plus, everybody knows it sucks.
Linux does not suck.
Gatorade.
Mind you, I will actually be probably writing a guide in May for the WinXP users who are suffering from memory. I'll be writing up a guide for dual booting with Linux, so they could take advantage of the full 4 gigs of RAM they got
Linux OS,
and have Mumble.
or Mint or Fedora or
Zorin. Zorin is essentially the most friendly version of Linux you can get for a Windows user.
UGE is so much better.
Yeah, well, the thing is that
Upper Grass Engine.
Ultimate Grass Engine.
Are you guys smoking grass?
The Grim for Grinder.
Hey, Pino, you didn't happen to run all the way up to Thornkeep? Oh, you are? Okay. Nice.
All right, we're just going to give Tork a minute to finish his tech issues, and then we'll get started. While he's doing that, I will do the shameless plug. This is part of Pathfinder University, company for new players. They can come here for 90 days, we help them out, then they got to get out. Our entire class list is at class.pathfinderuniversity.com. And as Lisa just said, next Wednesday is going to be Steven. So we're going to be rounding out our list of people that we've been through in Goblinworks. We're going to try to do one every Wednesday as much as we can. So those will be rotating as we go along. While he's doing that, if everybody could mute their mics, that'd be great. You can send me PMs in Mumble. You can either right-click or double-click my name and send it to them. Please try to do that rather than filling up the chat window on the side, because that can be distracting for some people. We're going to be rounding out our list of people that... It is being recorded, and all of the Keepside chats are available at youtube.pathfinderuniversity.com. I'll include both links in the Mumble.
Just to let you know, Bob's trying to help Tork out right now, and they're working on the details.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start by asking Lisa questions. Is that cool? You fine with that, Lisa?
Sure. I'll tell you, I'm looking at a very cool blog right now that I'm proofreading on holdings and outposts. I know I promised that a while back, but here it is.
So give us a little insight. What's coming?
Oh God, I gotta let Tork do that. That's his baby.
Okay, so then I want to ask you a different question. So you've done fireside chats with many of the groups now, if not all. What'd you learn from us?
What I learned from you. You guys asked the hardest questions. Pathfinder University asked the hardest questions.
That's not what I meant. I meant the overall player base.
You know, I would say that that there's, how do you put this? I mean, there's a lot of people having fun in the game, and there's a lot of people who are patiently waiting various things to be added to the game. The community is awesome, and the people you talk to have been very supportive of Goblinworks and Pathfinder Online, and so it's been fun, and there's been a lot of good feedback to give to the developers in here, and so I recommend that if any of you are run settlements and you haven't done a fireside chat with me, please email me at lisa@paizo.com, and I would love to set it up. I got one coming up with Keeper's Pass, I think tomorrow night. But I'd love to. There's a whole bunch of other ones that I haven't done. Golgotha, I'm looking at you, and so if you guys can email me, let me know.
All right, so Lisa, I got to ask you another one because I got you. How about there's been a lot of debates on this profanity filter and different things on ways we can help keep our community moving smoothly and cleanly. What are your thoughts?
Ah, God, and this is an area I shouldn't even reach out because I have no expertise when it comes to profanity filters in games. I know on Paizo we have a profanity filter that we use to sometimes humorously change your words, and that's how we do it on Paizo.com. I really haven't even been involved in any of the talks here, so not a good question to ask me.
Hello.
Hey.
It's Tork. Thank you for coming to save me.
We were going
Sure.
to keep quizzing Lisa until you came up, so she said you better get it fixed pretty quick.
That seems fair. Sorry, there was a bit of technical incompetence, but I've made it work. Everything's fine.
Great. Well, I'm glad to have you. Appreciate you joining us. For those who missed it, the name that says Goblinworks Bob is actually Goblinworks Tork.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's additional technical incompetence.
No problem. You are sharing equipment over there. So, Tork, thank you for coming out here. Love to get to know you a little bit. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I am Tork Shaw. I'm the PvP designer at Goblinworks. I'm not sure what else to tell you. I came from Darkfall, which is a game that some of you, I think, are familiar with. And mostly I deal with the settlement systems and things like the influence system and that kind of stuff as my kind of main focus, and then obviously all the other bits and pieces that we all do together.
So you said you're the PvP designer?
That's right, yeah.
So you try to find ways to get us to fight each other?
Yeah, that's it. And try and find ways to regulate it and try and make sense of how we can have an open world full PvP game without everyone getting massacred all the time.
So we've actually asked each of the Godwars people, and by the way, keep in mind, we got a series of questions collected from across the community, but we're just having a fun, good time here. So we've had some discussions in each of them, kind of how do you find the balance between Care Bears and murder hobos? Maybe you're the right person to answer that.
Right now, it's pretty good, I'd say. I mean, we're not too murder hobo-y as yet. I think that particularly the people who were early adopters of the game are less inclined to be murder hobos so far. I mean, we'll need to see as more and more people who didn't know anything about the game and have heard about it through other sources other than Paizo start getting involved. But I think right now we're doing all right.
Great. So there's been a lot of discussion on the thread, and you're probably no surprise. We want to talk about influence. Talk to us a little bit about kind of what your idea was behind the influence system. And, in light of all the different debates on the threads, any ideas changing, anything like that, or what are your thoughts?
Well, influence is meant to be, as I mentioned, I come from Darkfall Online, which is a kind of pretty brutal PvP environment. And a problem that we had there consistently was that the kind of the main metric or the main resource for being involved in the game was gold. And gold is an infinite resource and is controlled very heavily by the players because they can farm it as and when they like. And we had this weird problem where we had to keep increasing costs by just multiplying them by 10 and 50 and 100, and it just wasn't really working because players can control that resource. So influence is supposed to be a measure of your company's reach. It's a way to control or at least direct PvP behavior, company level and settlement, to some extent settlement level PvP behavior, without having to use a resource over which we have no control.
And there's been some debate there. I mean, you were talking about influence being the key to PvP. So, for example, Pathfinder University is not a PvP place. So, is there no value in influence for me?
The value is different. Influence allows you to initiate PvP, but it also allows you to have some control over when PvP is forced upon you. So even though you may not be interested in being a PvP guild, I mean, obviously the university is not the place to make attacks from, you would be able to, for example, push a feud that had been declared against you in order to make it a more suitable time or a time when more of you are online, or a time which is more defensive for you or whatever, rather than being at the will of the person who declared war.
Okay. And I get that, but then I saw something about, and I apologize for the questions because everybody's kind of debating these things, but I saw something about that influence determines how many holdings and outposts and things we can have. What does that mean?
Okay, so yeah, I think I saw that question too. I mean, holdings and outposts are PvP content. Any aspect of territory control in this game is supposed to be a PvP flag. You can't hold on to territory without and expect it not to be taken from you at some point, or at least expect no one to try and take it from you. Every company who want to have holding in this game are going to end up in PvP at some point, either because they are supporting the organization that they're affiliated with, or because they're too close to someone else's border, or because somebody goes on a rampage across the map. Every piece of held territory is a target and will always be a target in Pathfinder Online. So although there will be companies who don't want to or are less interested in being involved in PvP, holding on to something makes yourself a target. And that's why influence is specifically a PvP resource, even though it may appear to interact with systems that have more purpose outside and beyond PvP.
So, all right. So work this through. So I'm out in the southwest there in the plains, and I want to make a farm. I have to spend my PvP influence to do that.
You don't actually spend your influence, you bank your influence. So influence indicates basically the reach of your company. So you and your, let's say, 15 friends decide that you want to start a farm because, I don't know, you have a particular interest in cattle. So you start your farm by banking the influence that you've gathered over time. and that influence is sort of set aside. So you're not actually spending; it's kind of set aside and locked down for the time that you have that farm. And as and when you want to upgrade that farm, you continue to increase the amount of influence that you've locked down to add upgrades to that particular farm.
Okay. And now, if I read this correctly, each of my characters is going to give influence. But it sounds like, if I keep picking on the university, since we've got new players constantly, we're going to have a lot of influence. Is that true?
Yeah, it will. I mean, your maximum influence is capped by your number of players. And so I think, particularly in the case of the university, you're probably going to have a lot of churn. There's going to be a lot of people who join the university to begin with and then move on to another company. So although you'll probably have max influence all the time because you'll keep earning it so quickly, you'll keep effectively wasting influence that a lot of new players are earning for you because you're already at your cap.
And when they leave, they don't take the influence with them?
No, the influence belongs to you, belongs to the university. If you imagine it as the value that a player brings to that organization. So when I work for Goblin Works, any work I do for Goblin Works belongs to Goblin Works. I enjoy the benefits of anything I learn during this process, but if I was to leave Goblin Works, I'm not going to take all my work with me.
Okay. Now, can I spend that influence? They were talking about the influence and DI and all that. What's the difference between those? I mean, somebody was talking about I might need to spend my influence to build buildings in my settlement. Is that the case, or how's that work?
No, the influence is only for your company stuff. So your settlement builds buildings in a similar way. It uses DI and sets aside DI in order to build buildings. But your influence doesn't affect that at all.
What's DI?
DI.
By the way, Torg, I'm sorry if I'm asking you some basic questions. Some people haven't read the blogs for the past couple of years, so I'm bringing them up to speed slowly.
Sure, no problem. Okay. DI is development indexes. There are 3 of those for your settlement. There is security, morale, and something else, civilization. And those 3 indexes run from basically 0 to 1,000, and they determine, again, the reach of your settlement. They let you can build buildings within those totals. So you might build a building that costs 300. That means you have to set aside 300 DI of a particular type or of multiple types in order to have that building in your settlement.
Okay. So then the holdings you're talking about that I'm buying with influence, what type of holdings are those? I know there's a blog coming, but we're looking to have you share some of this.
Sure. The holdings are more like what your adventuring company might have. So there's an inn and a watchtower and a farm, things that sort of businesses, as it were, outposts and operations and what have you, that your adventuring company, you might have somewhere in the wilderness or somewhere near your home settlement, but they belong to the company instead of belonging to the settlement.
Okay, but many of the companies own the settlements too.
This is a hangover from the War of the Tower system. What actually happens, or will be happening, when a settlement is formed, is that basically a new company, which is the settlement company, is formed. So the original company who founded that settlement don't actually own that settlement. They will automatically be in all the positions of power, but their company continues to exist as a separate entity. So it continues to hold on to its own influence and all that jazz. It just runs its own thing. But the settlement becomes a sort of new meta company. So you could have leaders from the settlement who weren't actually members of the original founding company.
But does that mean they have membership in 2 companies then, essentially? One is the settlement and one's their actual company?
In a way, but being a member of a settlement doesn't mean you're a member of a company. You can be a random member of the public and be a member of a settlement without being a member of any company.
So if I can just be part of this meta company of a settlement, why should I have these little spin-off companies?
Because you won't be able to. I mean, well, the settlement management is really the bit that's the meta company. The reason for having additional sort of spin-off companies is that you need allies, and you need. Basically, it's unlikely that all of the players in the game will let you and your 10 pals run their lives for them. So what we wanted to do is to spread the management and responsibility and holdings across as many players as we possibly could. So a company of 20 people might have one holding. A settlement might have 30 ally companies who are all, nominally related to that settlement. And then the settlement leaders themselves have the holding of the settlement.
And right now, the settlement is attached to one person's account. Is that still the case?
What will happen is the settlement will be attached to the kind of meta company. So either you can have a kind of despot running some crazy settlement where they get all the control, but what's more likely to happen, because it's mechanically beneficial, is that the settlement leadership will be spread across multiple players. So you'll have a leadership council of, let's say, 10 people, all of whom get to input into decisions about that settlement.
By the way, the despots of the world, myself included, don't love that.
That's unfortunate, but you'll just need to fight your way out of it, I guess.
It's benevolent dictators. So, because there was a lot of talk about that, where people wanted to start their own settlement. Are we going to see another land rush, or is this just going to be battles for the empty settlements or the dead settlements?
Well, to take a settlement, you'll need a company, really, because you'll need to clear the escalation cycle in that area, and then claim that land, and then turn that land into a settlement. But once a settlement is up and running, I imagine a lot of them will start off with benevolent dictators. But in order to attract allies and additional settlement members, you're probably much better place to have a council that people can recognize and respect than just have one guy running the whole damn show.
Yeah, but so my question really is, there's a half a dozen dead settlements out there, and I know there's a bunch of companies that would like to take those over and make them their own. How's that going to happen, or is it going to happen?
It is going to happen, yeah. There should pretty much, well, we're aiming for, there should always be at least one empty settlement that can be taken at any time, and either that's because territory is expanded or because somebody's up and left or whatever, but there should always be space for a company who've grown large enough to take a settlement that hasn't yet been claimed.
So how do we, first of all, what's the timeline for that? Because a lot of people have been asking, and then people have their eyes on, I want XYZ settlement, or I want this space. I've heard kind of a year or two for that. Or is that sometime soon? What are you thinking?
What a difficult question. I would say, without wanting to be held to it, we're still looking at 6 months to a year before we're talking about that kind of settlement. All the holding stuff will come in first, and that's over the next few months. So it's probably going to be, I would say, 6 months to a year before we get the new sort of taking of settlements and all that in place. Okay,
I'm going to ask you a couple more settlement questions, and I know those are a bit more speculative, and then we'll go to holdings. Is that okay?
Sure, that works.
So, a theory-asked question, kind of, what type of mechanics are you going to put in there to encourage that there's no despot settlements?
Well, those development indexes that I mentioned, in order to raise that, well, there are a number of ways you can raise them. So you can raise them by getting territory, you can raise them by capturing trophies, you can raise them by building certain buildings in your settlement. But one of the best ways to raise them is to spread leadership across your across the council, so that the more leaders you have and the better their skills and ability scores related to their role on the council, the more basically free DI you get for that purpose.
Hold on, talk to me about that. So is that I've got a lot of achievements, so that's there, or is it because I'm specifically an officer or seneschal or something?
Again, there's a bit, we're kind of back and forthing a wee bit about this, but yeah, it'll be originally it was going to be based on your ability score. So if you wanted to be the ambassador, you'd need to have a really high charisma. But because we have some skills in place, like seneschal, as you say, an officer, it actually potentially makes more sense for us to allow people with a really high officer skill to be in the role of head of the town guard or what have you, and that provides a better DI bonus for that role.
So it's specific defined roles that we'd have to fill.
Kind of. That was the original plan was to have, I think, 12 council roles, but it might be that just as we're allowing, or eventually we'll be allowing players to determine their own ranks for their companies and settlements, we may allow you to determine your own roles.
But if we determine our own roles, will that impact our DI?
I think the mechanics will be pretty tight on that. So, for example, you'll be able to change the name of your diplomat, but you'll still have to have a high charisma or a high, whichever skill it is we tie to that role, diplomacy, I suppose.
Okay. So, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had a lot of debates on whether or not small settlements can survive. And it sounds like you're saying there's 12 leaders alone. So, it's encouraging bigger and bigger settlements. Is that fair?
That is fair. I think small settlements. The question of small settlements is a weird one because our original figures, design figures, were that a settlement would be in the hundreds and thousands. So a small settlement to me in all of my mathematics is a few hundred people, not a few tens of people. Now, obviously, all of these figures have been and will continue to be scaled back until we get the population. But if you have only just enough people to take a settlement in the first place, it's very likely that you're not going to be able to hold on to that settlement. So you're going to hope to recruit pretty fast.
So small settlements, a couple hundred. What's like kind of a medium and a big settlement in your numbers now? I'm not holding you to it.
Sure. In my numbers now, a small settlement is a couple of hundred, I would say. A medium settlement or an average settlement is somewhere between 600 and 1,000, and then anything larger than that is a large settlement.
So if I'm a settlement, so we've got 70 members now in the university. That's kind of on the right par, it sounds like. But if I'm a settlement where I'm kind of got a couple dozen people, that's going to be a little hard. Is that fair?
Well, because populations across all the settlements are relatively low, it'll be easier to begin with to hold on to that settlement. But certainly, let's say in 2 years' time, having a settlement of 25 people is probably not going to be viable.
And what about company size? So I've seen all types of things on there. There's like ideal company size of 50 or 35 or 15 or different things.
So ideal company size, when I started doing the maths, was about 25, up to maybe 35. But because, again, of our low populations right now, kind of ideal company size for, let's say, the next 6 months is somewhere more like 12 to 15, maybe 20 people.
Wow, that's kind of small. So should we like break a big company into a bunch of small companies?
That's up to you. You will, I think, as someone pointed out in the influence thread, there is a point where it's much more valuable to be broken up into smaller companies than it is to keep on chugging forward as a big one. Depends on what you want to do. If all of your members want to be together in one company, there's nothing stopping them. You can have as many members as you want, but it's just less efficient. So it's entirely up to the way you want to organize your social groups. I imagine, part of the reason for this, again, is that we want to spread power across as many people as we possibly can. And while a company may be viable and may be able to make itself work efficiently at 100 members, it's very possible that, well, it's excitingly possible that at some point during the life of that company, 20 or so of those members will become disgruntled for whatever reason and will either cause some problems in the company, or will stage a coup, or will do whatever it is they want to do to make that kind of exciting, politically motivated emergent gameplay. But in a way, it makes more sense to start earlier with 20 people, 5 companies of 20 people than 100 people.
Okay, we're going to come back to influence in a minute, but I want to finish out some settlement questions. So when are we going to be able to change our settlements and start building buildings? Are we talking 6 months to a year, or are we talking sometime soon?
I would say 6 months to a year. I know that's an enormous window, but I'm just looking over my right shoulder at a schedule for the next, let's say, 4 sprints, and that's all the holding stuff going on then. And we'll want to get a really good sense of how that's panned out, I think, before we start making too much of confirming too many decisions on settlement. So yeah, somewhere between 6 months and a year.
Okay, so realistically, from that time frame, making a seneschal right now is not going to help us until all that's done. Is that fair?
Yes. Although seneschal, interestingly, will decrease the upkeep cost of your holdings. So you might want to have a seneschal kicking around for a reasonably level seneschal kicking around if you're planning to run some kind of holding.
Talk to me about that. So it brings down your cost to upkeep the holding. What level seneschal are you talking about? Is there? I didn't see that in an Excel sheet anywhere. So
every level. It's a calculation done on the skill total. So it'll be based on, I forget which ability scores feeds into seneschal, probably intelligence or charisma. But yeah, it'll be a feature of that skill.
So we should just have a seneschal on the payroll, essentially.
I probably would. The thing is, if you can, depends on whether or not you can find someone to that role. Admittedly, to begin with, even if you're a seneschal role or any of the foreman roles on any of the holdings, the functionality you have will, to begin with, be limited. So while it's a useful thing to have. If you can't find someone to fill the role, you're not going to really suffer a great deal without it. But then as functionality increases, it might be quite nice for someone who's interested in playing that kind of role to try and get in at the ground level, because if they're better skilled than anyone else, they might get to hold on to control of that particular holding.
So the Seneschal kind of owns that holding or runs it, foreman or something?
Yeah, so each holding has a foreman, and then a bunch of workers, and the foreman contributes more of his skill to the holding than the workers do, but also eventually will get some elements of control or configuration for that holding.
Okay, that talks about Seneschal. Talk to me about, so how do we actually, let me just double check my settlements. Any issues on like the changing the maps of the settlement, anything we know there, or is it just wait for more around settlements?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean. You mean are we adding more settlements or something?
No, or any there's been discussions about the map, how many medium buildings, small buildings, all that. Has any of that been fleshed out?
Oh, I see. No, I'm still on my kind of basic figures with that right now. I mean, actually, as it happens, I've just been talking to Stephen about, we've been working out upkeep costs and what have you for these buildings and for settlements and for holdings. So I'll have more of that over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we have Stephen next week, so you might want to warn him.
I'll make sure he's fully briefed.
All right. So you talked about Seneschal. How about how do we actually build buildings? So I was very happy to see that the engineer is finally becoming useful. Kind of what does an engineer do? What does a carpenter do? What does a stonemason do?
Okay, these are, again, we're all sort of on, this is all outlining type stuff. I mean, the exactly what their contributions will be mechanically or numerically are still a little bit in flux. But the gist of it is you will build, the engineer rather will create a blueprint for the building that you want to build. And well, then that needs to be taken to the location at which you want to build. And then once the building is or that thing is dropped, the building will need to have workers to, well, this is for settlements, the building will need to have workers to make it work. So you need to get in your stonemasons and your carpenters, and they need to sign up to work on that building. And according to their skills, that building will be put up faster or slower.
And is it like only one person can sign on, or like 15 can sign on? How's that work?
There's currently no cap, actually, but each individual player can only be working at one building at a time. Okay.
And it sounded like you were saying there for a minute that we won't be using the carpenters or the stonemasons for holdings. Is that the case?
At the moment, the carpenter and stonemason don't have a role for holdings because the kits are made effectively ahead of time, and they just basically go up. They go up in an hour once you drop the kit down. So there's no, you don't have to work to build them. You only have to work once they're up and running.
So the engineer is going to build kind of essentially like a small holding deed, essentially, and you just right-click and it goes poof.
Exactly, works a very similar way to the small holdings.
Okay, can you give us any clues about? Hey, that's all going to be tier 2, tier, X level of engineering or anything like that?
I can't. However, we're just currently back and forth thinking about exactly how those recipes will be tiered themselves. What the advantages of building a better version of that would be, and exactly how that's going to play into the long-term life of that holding. So no, unfortunately. I mean, the gist of it is that there'll be a way to build a holding right the way through up the scale, but the higher tier engineers will be able to make better holding deeds.
And my assumption, and keep in mind I've been playing an engineer since Alpha, and it's been a passion. My assumption is that building those buildings is going to be a long queue time.
Holdings, not so much, no. For the settlements, possibly, although at the moment, again, and this is all sort of slightly speculative, there isn't a huge purpose to making people wait for, sorry, actually, I see what you mean, building the kits. The kits, yes, potentially. Yeah, I see. The kits, I'd have to talk to Steve, or you'd have to talk to Stephen about exactly how long they're going to end up being.
Hey, that'd be great if you let me make them in a minute or two, but...
I'll pass that on.
I don't think that's realistic. All right, so what type of buildings can I make for holdings and outposts? What are you envisioning?
For holdings, there are. Give me a second. I'll try and bring up the list. But there's a watchtower. There's an inn. These are the initial buildings: watchtower, inn. There's a farm. There's a fishery. There's a mine. There's a lumber mill. There's a trading post. This list will get longer as we have more time and more art resources and more programming resources. And to begin with, a lot of these buildings are going to have identical functionality, even though they look slightly different. But eventually, each one will have its own set of unique upgrades and provide its own set of unique bits and pieces.
And I'm assuming to build the buildings, we're going to need a variety of things to build the kits, refined goods and things.
That's right, yeah.
And so the holdings, sorry, I'm getting my holding and outpost backwards. So I get the holdings, I put those out first, then I build the outpost, correct?
That's right, yeah. The outposts are just satellite, effectively resource gathering nodes on the end of your holding.
Okay. And when you look at the holdings, so somebody asked a question, can we do remote auction houses?
There will be auction houses at some of the holdings, but if you say remote, as in can I operate them from home? No, you'll have to go to that location.
No, but I could take an auction house and put it, in a random hex in between here and I don't know, Hammerfall, and it could be an auction house.
Yes, some of the holdings, the inn, for example, has a certain level of auctioning stuff that happens there. The trading post obviously has a certain amount of auctioning stuff happens there, but all of them are tied. The tier of goods that you'll be able to sell at those auction houses are determined by the upgrades to that building. So you'll start off with a crummy auction house that only sells tier 0 goods, and then you can upgrade that building to allow the purchase and the sale of higher tiers.
So essentially you bring out another kit and build on the second floor?
Yeah, although it's done without a kit. Upgrades and what have you are done from within the management system for the holdings themselves.
Okay, so upgrades are done without a kit. Do we need to bring resources out there for those, or is it just influence?
Influence is certainly a requirement. Resources are possibly going to be a requirement, possibly coin. What will happen, though, is your upkeep will increase, so you'll have to provide the additional upkeep from the day that new upgrade goes live.
You said a lot about upkeep. What do I put in the upkeep box? Is it just collecting donations at the door, or what?
Upkeep will be a variety of things. There are 5 bulk goods which feed into upkeep, and those are the only place to get those. Almost the only place to get those will be, other than trading them, will be from the outposts. So your outposts provide you with a certain amount of the goods required to run your own holding, but you'll probably have to trade with other outposts or holdings in order to get all the goods that you need to maintain upkeep.
That's the bulk goods like food and wood and things like that?
Yeah, that's them.
Okay, so I'm going to need, let's go down the food path. I'm going to need food to keep up my outposts and holdings, but not necessarily for my settlement immediately, correct?
To begin with, your settlement is going to be the main drain on your bulk goods in the long term, but in the short term, the only drain I think is going to be your holding. Your outposts actually don't have an upkeep. There is a bit of chat about introducing a system to swap out the current way you're using towers to increase training. We're swapping that out for running upkeep instead to hold on to the training that you've got. But that's a bit pie in the sky right now because we're just focused on the outposts and the holdings so far.
All right, let's talk about the towers. When are those going away?
I feel like I can almost tell you. I'm looking at the schedule right now on the wall, but it's such an outline schedule. Sometime in the next 3 months, I would say.
Yeah, and by the way, when I ask time, I'm not trying to pin you down. If you say, hey, it's on the board or not, is a big difference.
Sure. Well, I'm looking at the basically, I think it's 4 or 5 sprints away, and we run 3-week sprints usually. Now that's where it is right now, and what tends to happen is that something that's in sprint, it could be that something that was meant to be in our second sprint takes a bit longer and pushes into the third and the fourth, and we have to move things around. But at the moment, I think we're looking at something like a few months.
Okay. So let's go back to kind of how do we put up a holding and an outpost and things like that. So how do I actually claim a hex? and how do I do that, and how do I place an outpost? Can people help me claim a hex, things like that?
Sure, you can only claim a cleared hex, like a hex with no running escalation cycle. So that you can get as many people as you want to come and help you do that. Only somebody who has a certain level of permissions within the company can then claim that hex, which is done using an outpost, a holding kit. You need to have the available influence. That person needs to have the right permissions, and then you just pop that thing down, and ta-da, you got it.
Okay. And then, are we talking like a couple of rollouts before we're seeing these, or are we talking, months?
Couple of months, maybe. Again, difficult to say. I mean, I think probably 2 or 3 sprints, but that. So what is that? That's 6 weeks or maybe 8, 9 weeks, something like that, for the basic versions of these holdings. But again, let's all not get too excited because you never know what could happen.
And when those come in, when the day they come in, are we going to be able to capture them from other places or things like that, or any of that PvP?
Yeah, the outposts run. Oh, sorry, the holdings run a similar. I'm going to keep making that mistake because we used to call things outposts and then we switched to holdings.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who's confused.
Yeah, and I also some of my documents still have the wrong thing written on them. It's all over the shop. But yeah, the holdings you can capture in a similar way to the way you capture towers.
So I just have to go AFK at it for an hour?
Yeah, that's exactly how PvP works. You just go AFK for 1 hour and you're sorted.
Well, that's what's happening with towers right now. I mean, no?
I think that the difference, or one of the differences for towers versus holdings is that there will be many fewer towers. We also hopefully, well, not immediately, but the feuding system will be in, I think, 1 sprint after we get the holdings in, which means that people will need to specify effectively that they're going to try and take your holding. And also we'll have to have chosen time ahead of time because the feuds run ahead of time.
Now, do I have to be part of a settlement to have a holding?
No, you just have to be a company.
So I could just be a random company, pick a hex, clear it out, and drop down my building.
Provided you have the influence, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously then the question comes, can you hold on to that? And if you're just, 5 or 6 people who have just scraped together the right amount of influence to take a hex, I think you'll struggle to hold on to it. But yeah, why not? You might as well, if you want to pour the resources into capturing it and hope that you can recruit enough people for your company to help defend it, then have at you.
Now, when it's can we destroy holdings, or they transfer to other people, or what?
Originally, they were the most recent design has them being destroyed when captured, but we're trying to look at a way that maybe we can transfer them instead, because it might be quite fun to be able to take over all the work that somebody else has done for you.
Okay. So the influence, let's talk about influence and influence math, because there's been a lot of discussion about that. So the influence that we're gaining now really isn't going to matter for another couple months. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'd say so, yeah.
Okay. And what's happening April 1st? I saw a note that all people have to be in there by April 1st or something.
That's a good question. I didn't see that note. You mean the blog? When we make the change, what's happening is that we're basically backdating your influence, a bunch of influence based on achievements that you have. And as a result, you probably want to organize yourselves into sensibly sized companies, because otherwise influence will get lost when you divide up after that.
So that's that April 1st date?
I'm going to say yes, but I don't have the blog up in front of me.
All right. Well, I'll have to ask Stephen about that. Well, actually, it'll be April 1st when we're doing that. So hopefully it's one of the questions they had was kind of is that before or after or what, but probably not your question.
No, I think I'm almost sure you're right. I think that is the date in the blog, but I just don't happen to have it right up in front of me.
Okay. So I will have this bank of influence that kind of backdated. Now, if I'm not part of a company on April 1st, and I join a company on April 2nd, what happens to my influence then?
Nothing. You'll lose that influence.
Okay, so we all have about a week to recruit everybody that's on the server. Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, I mean, this is, I suppose, a symptom of a feature of that thread on the forums. Influence is don't get too excited about influence or too excited about grabbing it now or earning it or whatever, because you will earn it over time. You won't have to worry about scrabbling around for influence. It's going to be something that is a feature of the game that you, unless you're running the company, don't have to worry about.
Okay. Well, a lot of people are worried about the math of this, man. I've seen more math equations on this. Is it possible to be an all-crafting company and still be able to make this work?
What do you mean make this work?
So there's a lot of debate about, it seems like it's a whole lot easier to get influence by just going out and farming a whole bunch of goblins than it is going out and making tier 2 armor, which takes you a full day or two to make.
If you only have a company, if you have a company in which everyone is only a crafter, I imagine you will earn influence slower, yes.
Okay.
The process of crafting things is a slower process than the process of blatting goblins. That's definitely true. If you have already blatted an awful lot of goblins, then you will find that you're earning influence extremely slowly. So those players who are going out and doing level appropriate content will find that they earn influence faster than players who are crafting, even if their crafting is level appropriate.
That's fair. So, okay, if I'm reading between the lines, I had a bunch of questions about kind of how do settlements and outposts work together. But the answer is they really don't, essentially. If the companies can be separate and the settlement and the company don't have to be together, the settlement's not like getting a cut or anything like that. Is that fair?
That's correct. But the settlement needs the resources. Settlement upkeep is pretty onerous, and they will have to have as many hexes as they can at least affiliated with them, if not necessarily allied or associated.
But there's no game mechanic to like take it out and put it in the settlement.
Only PvP.
Okay, so that's kind of that partnership thing.
Exactly. If you are my neighboring holding owner and you won't cooperate, and I'm a big settlement and I need your outpost goods, then I'll probably raid you or I'll flatten you.
Okay. I had a great question from the audience. Can influence be traded? If I'm a crafting settlement, I make somebody tier 2 armor, I go, give me some influence?
No. Influence specifically can't be traded. It doesn't go with players either. It belongs to the company.
Ah.
There is one tiny caveat to that, and that is that if you engage in a feud and you're successful, you may gain a certain percentage of your additional percentage of your influence back.
Okay. So talk to me about that feud. We're gonna have to spend influence to start the feud, and then if we win, we essentially get like a bonus.
Yeah. What actually happens is you just bank influence. You don't spend it. You bank it to start a feud, and the cost is dependent on your power versus the person you're trying to feud with. And then if you are successful in your feud, you may get a bonus chunk of influence. However, the mathematics on that are still pretty far from complete.
Yeah, and Flame's got a great question. Kind of, what does it mean when you say successful in a feud? We capture the flag or what?
Yeah, pretty much. So when we end up with a feuding system, if you want to capture someone's tower, we're no longer going to have open PvP in or a tower equivalent holding. When a PvP window is open, it's no longer going to mean that there's PvP rampant in that hex. It means that that is the period during which that holding can be captured. But only people who have declared a feud can capture that tower.
Okay. Now, when you're talking about placing the holdings and things, I saw on an old blog that you can't put it in pass hexes and roads and things like that. Is that still the case?
There are some hexes you can't put it in. You can't put it in hexes that belong to someone who is not your ally. And there are a bunch of like NPC type hexes and road hexes and what have you that you can't put them in either.
So that goes back to the old map where there was the triangles with a circle in them or something like that?
I wouldn't know. I'm pretty sure that all of that old map stuff is no longer valid. The rules are the same, but I think that the actual specifics of which hexes are okay and which aren't are not going to work from the old map.
Is there any way we can get an update on that? I know that's probably an ask, but I think, like Riverbank originally had the big road behind it. Can we still use those hexes, those type of things?
Sure, I'll have a word with Lee. He does know already which hexes are available, so at the very least we could probably put a line in them and scan it and put it online. So I'll ask him.
Yeah, we're very excited about that. All right, so let's go back to feuds a little bit because I got a bunch of questions about that. Is feuding the only way to raid a holding, or can a company decide which holding they want to raid, and which just kind of wander around like, hey, I want to take this over?
That is a bit of a late game question, in as much as it'll be a couple of sprints before we get tech that makes that stuff work properly. I think to begin with, you'll see it only being people who have declared a feud that can actually raid. But the intention is that later on you'll be able to raid anyone who is available.
And there's also a couple questions kind of going, you keep correcting me from spent to banked. What does that mean? I mean, does that mean like we're just putting it aside and I can use it again later, or what, on influence?
Yeah, exactly. So let's say you have 1,000 influence and you want to run a feud with me for no reason, even though I haven't provoked you. Then you would maybe have to put aside 500 influence to do so. That influence is not available during the duration of our feud, and then at the end of our feud, you get that slowly back over time.
Okay, so like I spent 100 to put a holding or outpost out there, and then that's essentially banked, and then I have to earn that back over time. Is that how that works?
No, that's banked. So you have to have 100 ahead of time. So let's say you're 150. You already had 150, and you tried to take you took a holding. You banked 100. That means you have 50 available influence, which you can use for whatever purpose you want to use it for. And then as you earn more, obviously that number 50 will go up until your max.
All right, so let me work that through a little bit more. So if I have 1,000 influence and I take 10 holdings, I've got nothing left, and I'm out of luck unless I get more members and raise my cap. Is that fair?
Exactly that.
So if I want to be feuding, I'm actually going to have less holdings.
That's correct. Or you could have, let's say you had 1,000 influence and you took 5. Maybe you upgrade a couple of them so they're costing you 200 and keep the rest of the min level, which seems like a weird thing to do, and that would still leave you some space for feuding. But your upgrades will also be banked. So while a holding costs you 100 to get, a maxed out holding will cost you nearly 1,000.
And if I like rip down the holding, can I get the money back or the influence back?
You can, but not right away. There's a regeneration rate.
Like days, months, years?
Yes. That wasn't fair. It's more like hours.
Okay.
But it could be a lot of hours if you banked 1,000 influence and you're trying to regenerate 1,000 influence. It could be a couple of days because it's a lot of hours.
All right. So there's I keep getting a bunch of questions. Sorry if I bounce around a little bit. So I want to go back to the feudings. I want to go over and rob somebody's auction house. I have to announce a feud before I do that?
Well, what would actually happen is you would more likely be taking their auction house. Like if someone had dumped down an inn or a trading post, to feud them or to go and attack them in the short term, what you'll be doing is taking that. In the same way as you would take a tower. You won't be able to steal their stuff and run away in the first iteration of this.
So I can't just take their stuff and go. All right.
Well, you will be able to from outposts. If you raid an outpost, you're just taking their stuff and going. But if you go for the full-on holding, then actually we're talking about you taking it and destroying it.
Okay, so let's work through an example. So if my holding is a farm, what is my outpost?
That is up to you. You have 2 outposts, and you can pick from a list of what those outposts might be. They're all harvesting type things. So there's like a mine or a sawmill, I think it's called. I'll bring up the list in a moment. But you want to pick something that's relevant to the hex that you're in. So something that feeds well off the resource ratings of that particular kind of hex.
Well, and Lisa had kind of given us an idea that there was 15 holdings and 7 outposts. And it sounds like you have a list there. Mind sharing some of the list with us?
Maybe. Give me just a moment.
Everybody wants the names.
Sure, no, I understand. One of the problems with giving you the names, which I'm about to do now, so brace yourselves, is that you'll find the names for the outposts and the holdings are currently the same, because my original list of outposts ended up becoming the my original list of holdings, a lot of them ended up becoming the outpost instead, because we were like, well, actually, who really wants to own a pure ranch that only produces horse meat or whatever for their holding? We thought it'd be much more fun to have something a bit more exciting. So the list of outposts are as follows: farm, ranch, mine, lumber mill, hunting lodge, quarry, fishery, and glen.
Last one was Glen.
Yeah, although Glen actually I think is not making it into the first cut.
Okay. And those are the holdings?
Outposts.
Outposts. Sorry, the terms I keep getting confused. My bad. All right.
The outposts are an inn, watchtower, barracks, farm, hunting lodge, mine, trading post, and ranch.
Okay.
There are additional outposts that will be coming later, which are holdings that are becoming later, including the library, the hermitage, the shrine, the manor, the monastery, the hideout, and I think the sanctum was the last one.
And those are probably 6 to 12 months down the road for those.
It'll be a wee while for those ones.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple more fun questions. So you came from Darkfall. What's been the biggest surprise when you came to Goblinworks?
I think in a way the pressure to balance the PvE side, or the what you might call the more Careberry side, with the PvP side, because I'd come from such a hardcore PvP game. I mean, it's surprise is maybe the wrong word. It's a really interesting challenge to try and make sense of that, because obviously we have a huge Paizo type player base who are not necessarily interested in hacking each other up all the live long day. So there needs to be enough to make the game work for them. But at the same time, the driver of this game is territory control and PvP combat. So it's quite interesting to try and seek that balance across the whole game.
And how are you getting that balance? Because everybody's worried about the balance of PvP and what's there. And there's been some discussion about, is there enough PvP? Is there not?
Well, what's hugely problematic at the moment, I think, is that a lot of the PvP particular features have not been released yet. So there's a lot of my main task as PvP designer is to try and make PvP meaningful. And at the moment, it's very difficult to do that with the systems that we have in game. There are a lot of systems to come that make PvP more meaningful and help people to be interested in becoming involved in PvP, and to feel less bad about getting involved in PvP if they're not really PvPers.
So I've had a couple people ask me a question, what about assassins? Because that was one of the discussions of PvP back, and stalking people and all that.
Assassins are awesome. We have a bunch of exciting features, hopefully, to further down the line for assassins. Assassination, I talked about the council, the ruling council of a settlement, and how each individual member grants a DI bonus. When we have the assassination system up and running, you'll be able to assassinate specific members of a settlement in order to affect their DI, which is what you'd probably want to do before you go to war. You'd probably want to sneak in, kill all their council, lower their DI, which starts to turn off some of their buildings and defenses and make them weaker for when you go to war.
That sounds really cool. There's also been some debate about, is the durability, the 20 out of 20, is that good? Is there any way that, if you kill somebody, you can take their gear, what's equipped or anything like that? Have you had any thoughts on those?
Durability is an interesting one. It was a sort of elephant in the room for a long time, because we were worried about what players would say about durability. We thought, oh no, people are going to say, well, I'm miffed about this because it's a really crafting-y based game and I'm annoyed that my things are getting destroyed. But it's an essential part of any economy-based game. And at the moment, people aren't dying enough. It's too easy to avoid death, particularly because there aren't enough PvP systems on the go. But when we have a lot more PvP, I think you'll begin to find that 20 hits of durability is woefully inadequate in mass combat.
In mass combat? What does that mean?
Well, when there's 100 of you fighting another 100 of you, you're going to be dying just all over the shop. It's going to be brutal.
So that's fair. So each of the Goblinworks staff have given us some interesting fact about them. We found out scuba divers. We found out somebody owns Yoda. Somebody can shoot a whole lot of arrows at once. What's the cool fact about you?
What a difficult question right on the spot. What's a cool fact about me? I don't know. As a hobby, I guess I run. I'm a DJ. Have run a bunch of parties across the UK and the US. So I suppose that's interesting, if not necessarily cool.
Like a professional DJ, like people come out and see you by the thousands.
It's not by the thousands. I think the biggest gig I've ever played is probably 600 or 700 people. But so no, not a much of a draw.
The 600 to 700 is pretty good. And then the other question we ask a lot of people is, what was the biggest surprise you saw from us as players? Oh, by the way, what's your DJ name? People want to know that first.
See, Crop, which is just Tork backwards.
Okay.
I can't remember. I think they're probably. What's the next thing I'm playing is this Friday. They're going to be boosting this event. This Friday, I'm playing a Comic-Con party at Neighbors.
Oh, very nice.
That's in Seattle.
So, what's the biggest thing we as players did to surprise you?
I think the conflict between the PvP and the PvE stuff is still a surprise to me in a way, because although it's set in the Pathfinder universe and it's a Pathfinder game, even the early promotional materials and literature was quite heavy on the PvP stuff. Like, it talked about settlement building and settlement destroying and going to war and what have you. And it does continue to surprise me that we haven't attracted more PvP focused players already, and that we keep bouncing backwards and then sort of bouncing forwards and bouncing backwards to try and make PvP more or less viable for a group of people who aren't all actually totally into it.
So I take it you didn't love that we kind of nerfed the towers and just worked together on those, huh?
No, I mean, I did. I love it. I think that's fantastic. That kind of emergent play is really exciting to me, and that was actually the most exciting stuff that happened in Darkfall, was really the alliances and the politicking that went on around and about the actual stabbing up of people. I think it's difficult because of the where the populations are right now. I think that we need more people, and we need more people of both varieties. We need more crafters, we need more PvE players, we need more PvP players, and we need more people. We need more would-be kings. We need more angry despots who want to rule a swathe of land. We need that kind of pressure in and on the game in order to start creating, exciting stories.
That's fair. So we're about up on our time, at least from. I want to be respectful of your time. You're welcome to stick around. But any last thoughts for us?
No, I think you've picked me clean.
All right, well, you're welcome to stick around, but you do not have to. The after chats are usually always just as interesting as other things. I think people are very excited to see you, and we appreciate you coming out. Hope to have you out again in the next month or two as some of these other things come across. So that's okay with you.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, I'd love to. I mean, it's quite fun talking about the game to people who aren't immediately working on it.
Yeah, we've been trying to get the insight, so I might as well ask the other question. Any weird things going on in the office? Anything surprise you there?
No, we're relatively quiet, actually, and we've recently got some lights, which has been an ongoing struggle because the programmers want to work in the dark and everyone else wants to work in the light, and we've now managed to get light source happening in different parts of the office so that you don't have to watch where you stand or accidentally fall over something. It's great.
People are throwing up links now of Hurricane Crop and how this works. It's pretty cool.
Oh, good. I look forward to Googling my name any minute now.
Yep.
Yeah, good point. now I'm looking at the text on this mumble. Now I'm sort of nervous of what I've let loose in the world.
You know what? It's been the same on all of them. And actually, it's been some of the most interesting stuff is some of the get to know people as people. So I appreciate you coming out there. And by the way, I won't be surprised to see some extra people at your gigs.
Magic, that's good news.
All right, I will open up the room to everybody in here, and if you'd like to, stick around, Tork, great. If you got to go and want to run, that's fine too.
Yeah, sure. I'll be around for the next 20 minutes or so. If there's anything I can answer that's not too probing.
All right, take it easy, guys, and I will be here. If you ask a question that's too obnoxious, I may say Tork doesn't have to answer that. So anyone want to ask Tork a question? Now's the time.
I got one.
Yeah.
What is your what's the anticipated rollout schedule for the different phases of holdings, outposts, and feuds?
Okay, so obviously this is all outliney, but a couple of sprints time we should be to basic holdings and basic outposts, and then about a month later we should be looking at feuds and some of the upkeep stuff. And then another month or a bit less than a month later, we will be looking at probably the end of the towers, and that's when a lot more of that space will be freed up for holdings and what have you. And then beyond that, it's all a bit of a fog of war.
I just want to point out one thing: is the blog that will be coming up probably on Friday has outlines the phases and what's in each of the phases and timelines on that and stuff. So you'll see that on Friday.
I have a couple of quick questions for you, Tork. These are questions surrounding sort of some of the leaders and how to split up the companies a bit better. Sorry, one second. Just so on feud mechanics, which are coming in so over many weeks, you talked about pushing away feuds. Could you explain how that happens?
Sure. So when you declare a feud, you bank a bunch of influence for declaring that feud, and then it will take place a certain number of hours later. The default is, I think, an hour later, so there's an hour lead time on running a feud. But the victim, as it were, of that feud can choose to push an incoming feud by a certain number of hours by actually paying influence.
Okay, and you said earlier that when you win a feud, you could potentially gain back some extra influence. Is that influence taken from the victim?
Possibly. That's actually the first thing we talked about was that. But we, unfortunately, as with all these systems, they become gameable and exploitable if we allow organizations to shift influence around. So it's more likely that you'll just get a kind of nebulous bonus influence.
Okay.
Over your cap? Is that above your cap?
No, you can never go above your cap. Although I would mention that I think this hasn't, not sure if it's in the blog, but the capped influence is capped by the number of players that you have in your company, but you can actually win trophies that will increase your cap above the number of players that you have. Trophies come out of completing escalation cycles, beating escalation bosses, and eventually will come out of completing dungeons and completing events, that kind of thing.
Hey, this is Takasi. Could you speak a little bit about the Cataclysm? Like a little bit of when it happens. Right now, their NPC settlements support up to rank 8 and PC settlements 9 and plus for the towers. Do you see a rollback of that? I mean, will we be in a position where we have to go back from, say, level 11, 12, 13, depending on where we're at, once the towers are gone? How far back do you think we'll be rolled back? And just a basic timeline.
Sure. Well, I think that we're hoping to avoid too much of a rollback at all. There will probably be a bit of a mad scramble for some territory, but generally speaking, we're going to try and ensure that you don't lose out too much during that period. Certainly, also skills won't degrade immediately. So even if you were to lose a couple of towers or equivalent, you wouldn't lose all your skills right away. You still have a wee bit of time to try and fight your way back to getting them. In terms of timescale, the destruction of the towers is, I think, 3 or 4 sprints away, so it's a wee while. It's still a couple of months anyway. I think, as Lisa pointed out, that'll probably be in that blog, but there's still a bit of time before we get there. However, that said, sorry to make this answer really long, the splitting up into smaller company sizes on April the 1st in order to get the best out of your influence will potentially affect towers, as someone pointed out in that thread. But that, unfortunately, is going to be the nature of that operation. So hopefully, although you'll all be in slightly smaller companies, you'll have to try and find different ways to work together, different alliances and what have you, to make that tower capture stuff work.
And for smaller settlements that currently maybe only have certain holdings that specialize in supporting certain types of training, can you speak a little bit about how the alliance system will work as far as cross-training?
I can a little bit outline you that basically you'll be able to train at your allies' settlements. Your allies, however, will have to be within a certain range of reputation and alignment with you. And there may potentially be an influence cost or a DI cost to having multiple alliances. So it actually could get quite onerous if you, for example, wanted to focus on only one thing. You would still have to have potentially have a wee bit of spare influence or DI to make a lot of alliances with a bunch of people.
Great, thanks.
But it sounds like a company really cannot be on its own making its outposts if it wants training. Is that fair?
That's right, yeah. Every player in the game will have to be a member of a settlement. And to begin with, that can be NPC settlements, but eventually you will have to join either a settlement, not independently from your company. You could join a settlement, or your company will have to be allied with a settlement.
You talked a while ago about and just mentioned it recently, that influence can be used to forge alliances with other companies or settlements, usually to establish trade agreements or provide mutual security. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. Again, this is to begin with. Influence is probably just going to cover your feuding stuff because that's the simplest implementation that we can do. But I did want there to be an influence cost to creating alliances or short-term contracts, because there are implications. There are sort of world implications to everyone being in alliances all the time that I think should have an ongoing cost.
So actually, let me ask a follow-up question on that. Will we be able to see how much influence another company has?
No, but it probably won't be that hard to find out if you've got some spies on the go.
But I mean, there's not like here's an influence cheat of how much they spent or whatever. We'd have to do it manually or spying, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And then there's also a question from the audience of if a company is at their influence cap, can its members still earn influence?
Its members will still earn influence, but it won't go anywhere. So if you're at your cap, everything you do will still earn your company influence, but that influence is effectively wasted. I think this is one of those questions, or one of those conceptions that makes the influence system look frightening in a way. But the point is, the influence belongs to the company. It doesn't belong to the player. Everything every player in that company does will earn the company influence. It doesn't matter to the players. It's not important to the players in the same way as it is to the company.
Can you talk a little bit about the boons that you gain that would give you from spending influence or I guess banking influence towards a boon?
Not so much, unfortunately. I mean, I can speculate wildly because that's as far as we've got. We've been throwing around a few ideas about what they would be. There would be short-term bonuses, certainly. There might be bonuses to crafting. There might be bonuses to travel speed. There might be bonuses to encumbrance. There might be bonuses to gathering or refining. There'll be short-term bonuses that you can sort of switch on. A lot of them, I think, will probably end up feeding into the factional system, so you can get faster faction reputation with one faction or another or what have you, but they won't be mechanically important for PvP. It won't be like, right, we'll get 10 times health regeneration for 2 hours or something like that. It'll be much more sort of light and frothy.
Okay, to change direction a little bit, a question that has been asked quite a bit within TEO specifically is the secondary and tertiary companies. Do you have an ETA for that at all?
Actually, no, I don't. I'm sorry. It's not. I'm again looking to my right. I'm not seeing it on the list. I think it probably, I would guess, would end up happening around the time. I mean, it's something that would probably be important around feuds, but it may actually get pushed until a wee bit later. So not for a couple of months anyway.
Regarding the maximum influence, does a company have a number that keeps getting incremented even if their maximum is lower than that?
I'm not. Do you mean somewhere in the code?
Yeah, because for instance, as you gain members, you could start to use some of your maximum influence. Your maximum influence increases a little. So I'm wondering whether, if you've been accumulating it, and as you gain members, your max will keep raising because you already had it. You were just being cut off. You were being.
I see what you mean. Sure. I mean that's not an intended feature of the system, because that would allow. What we want to avoid is companies who are quite small from banking reach, as it were. So that would allow a company who was relatively small to gather a whole lot of influence that they hadn't, that shouldn't have been available to them until they suddenly get those members. We don't want any company to suddenly have a huge amount of influence. We want you to have to earn influence at a similar rate to your recruitment.
Well, then the problem is that if, let's say you have a company of 100 and you lose 20 people, your influence immediately gets cut, doesn't it?
It does, you're right.
And you have to earn it all back up again, even though your company had that influence?
Well, you have to earn the influence that's been cut, yeah.
That seems like it's going to give players a lot of influence on blackmailing the company.
Again, earning influence is not hugely onerous. So you'd have to be, really worried that none of your other company members were ever going to earn anything in order for you to say, well, okay, I'll definitely not lose you. The actual amount of influence held by or granted by individual players is minimal, particularly in a company of 100 members. It doesn't really matter if you lose one or two people. Additionally, I think that there should be some reason why players can secure their investment in a company. If I spent a long time earning influence with this company, then I think it's reasonable for me to be able to say, well, actually, if you don't listen to me, or if we don't get to have a more reasonable debate, or I really dislike the way this is going, let's talk about it or something. I feel like they should have a stake, more than a stake, in the company, instead of just being droppable at the drop of a hat.
But their own influence will never actually matter. It'll be just the fact that that body leaves and they cut a certain percent of the influence.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I'm not sure if what point you're making there, then, in as much as that would have been exactly my answer. I mean, their own influence is what's important, is the max influence. It's not necessarily the influence that they've gained over time, historically.
Okay, well, at least I understand it. I don't know where that's going to lead me, but now I understand it.
And
Sure.
And there was another question in the audience, but I think this is what the bottom line is. Bottom line is, when a player leaves a company, they leave their influence with that company and then essentially start over. But they start over at the higher end, which is harder to gain influence, correct?
It's not their influence. It never has been and never will be. It's the company's influence.
Exactly. It never was the player's influence. This is what I think is, the point about crafting as well, it's never your influence. The influence belongs to the company. It's the work that the company has done while you were at the company. It just so happens that a contribution to that work comes from you. So when you talk about starting again, you will never see your influence score. As a player, you're never going to know how much influence you have generated or are generating. It's never going to actually be shown anywhere in the UI. The only reason that you have any idea how much influence you're going to generate at this date on April the 1st is because we've released the equation that we're using, as it were, for that purpose. But from that point onwards, you're never going to know how much you're contributing to your company or not. It's not about you, it's about the company.
You mentioned some of the starting outposts. Yes, sir.
Why on earth do you have to do that? Why do you have to generate influence for your company? Why do you think that you're obliged to go out and generate influence for the company? That's not how the system works. A company you join, unless it's a brand new company, is likely to be somewhere near its maximum influence already. So anything you're contributing is either going to get lost or is bonus influence to them because they're relatively close to the top of it already.
They should be fairly happy to be getting a 10th level, whatever you are.
Well, exactly, and hopefully you're a wonderful asset to the company in other ways. You're not a machine that generates influence. It's not your job or your expectation that you're going to generate influence at a certain rate or another. There's a bonus for you to being a younger player or a newer player, which sometimes is problematic because you don't have the skills, you need more resources, you need more investment. But the bonus to try and balance that out is that you will earn influence faster. But you're not obliged to, you don't have to go out and earn influence. That's not how the system works.
So back over to the question about outposts. You mentioned some of the ones that we're going to be starting with, and one of those was the watchtower. Can you explain what the watchtower will do?
I can tell you right off the bat that to begin with, it's basically just a tower. It's just a holding. Eventually, the watchtower will increase perception modifiers to guards in that hex. It adds a resurrection point. It increases damage and armor for the guards in that location. It can be upgraded to be much more defensible, and it trains, or will eventually train, ranger and fighter skills.
Okay, so earlier you were talking about the hexes that we basically can't put anything in, but you kind of skirted over if we can actually claim a pass hex, and that's been something pretty big for quite a lot of people because there's quite a lot of choke points there across the map. Sorry, go ahead.
So, well, the pass hexes, I think it's dependent. Some of them have fewer locations for fewer 30-meter locations, which means that they may not be able to actually take an outpost. I do believe, however, that some of them, if not all of them, are going to be claimable. But I need to look at I need to get Lee to send you that map. But just from a discussion we had today about how much more valuable it's going to be to hold those particular hexes, I have a funny feeling that a lot of them at least, are now claimable.
Okay, awesome.
Deathly silence. Are we good?
Any last questions for Tork? I really appreciate your time.
I got one.
Hold on. The guy wants in.
Sure.
While he's forming his question, I'm going to make a shameless plug. Next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. And people have reminded me, now we're in daylight time, not standard. We will have Steven, and that will round out most of the Gomworks team. So send me your questions. I will be prepared for him. We're going to get back to Tork sometime soon, but let's go with Tagari. You guys have influence for contracts and assassination?
Possibly. Depends on exactly how we end up with the assassination system. It might be that assassins can operate as lone wolves, and in which case it will probably end up being coin. But if, for example, you wanted to hire a company who specialized in assassination or harrying a bunch of things or running a sting operation or something, then you'd probably end up being influenced. Basically, any situation where you're co-opting the power of another organization will probably cost you influence. But if you're just borrowing the power of an individual, it'll probably cost you gold.
Technically, I do have like 32 more questions, but just to ask you like one more or two more here about the holding specifically. There was sort of a let's see here. Can you talk about the warning system that it will be in place, or if there will be a warning system in place for when someone attacks your holdings or attacks your outpost banks?
Sure. The warnings will only be when that happens. We're not going to have any, oh, someone's in my hex warnings. It's always going to be, okay, somebody's actually made an attack on this thing. But it'll just basically be a company-wide warning or potentially settlement-wide warning, depending on your alliances. So everyone that we think or you think should be notified will be notified.
Okay, awesome.
I'm going to have to scoot off, if that's all right.
Yep, thanks a lot, Tork. We really appreciate having you.
Sure, no problem. I enjoyed it.
Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you. I will talk to you all later. Bye.
And you all are welcome to hang out and have a chat. Usually the after chats are quite entertaining.
So Hoffman. So I actually wrote down how many questions you asked.
About 10.
You asked 58 questions.
Well, it depends on how you look at the questions.
They only counted 4 multi-part questions that counted as multiples.
No, but what ended up happening is you end up having to ask follow-up questions to get deeper into it.
Yeah. I would say that the list that I sent you, between what I asked and what you asked, probably covered about 60-70% of it.
Yep.
Did we record this one?
We did. Pino got it. It'll be on youtube.pathfinderuniversity.com.
That's great. I tried to write as fast as I could on those 7 outposts and 15 holdings, and he talks really fast.
The biggest thing that I've seen there is it seems like they have changed the sprints in terms of when we're going to get holdings and when we're going to get feuds. Because they definitely said at one point that iteration 7 we're going to have some type of holdings available. It looks like it's more towards 8 or 9 now.
You know, I was quite surprised at how long it's going to take before we'll be able to change settlements and do things.
On that level, oh yeah.
So, I mean, all those people that have been kind of planning this, that, and the other, and I want to do this, that, and the other, and all the debates about which deity you're going to do and all that, that's all academic for a long time.
Yeah.
It'll pass quicker than we realize, though. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm thinking, man, it's already the end of March.
Absolutely, but at the same time, you know, the holding an outpost mechanic is going to change the game as is.
Yeah, I believe it's a game changer.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're going to be sitting here. We're going to have things to do outside of what we're already doing, and with the outpost, I mean, that's going to be a daily activity for hauling all that material back to the settlement. Plus, we're also going. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm also selling my engineer services to the highest bidder.
Amen to that.
Building kits and blueprints, as well as everything else you're building now. Yeah. It's gonna be pretty busy for the engineers. Although I like how Seneschal will be important very soon.
Yeah, that was nice to see. I didn't expect that one.
Yeah.
Have they added the skill back in? Because I haven't found any trainers for it.
Nope, it's not back in yet. I've looked. They said that it was removed. They're going to be putting it in later.
So what was the most expensive improvement he was discussing as far as outposts and all that?
You know, I got the feeling like there's not really a great plan for like the, you know, improvements. I mean, they're just trying to get the basic MVP stuff out.
He did say specifically that the highest level holding is going to be 1,000 influence. So that's interesting.
But how a company spends their influence is going to be very important.
Well, I don't think you should say spin though. That means to me that you can't get it back.
Allocate.
If it's a building, you really can't.
No, you can't.
Oh, because you have to bank the influence. You need to have it before you can build it.
Oh, somebody takes it, then you can get your influence back.
Yeah, it's more of an allocation.
Yeah.
Although I think it was Savage Grace that was talking about it. I think you're right that some people could hold a company hostage a bit. I mean, if you had like a mass exodus, they'd be screwed.
Well, I mean, if you have a mass exodus, then something's going on.
But I mean, it is possible now to mutiny.
Well, actually, the other thing is that you have to think this around. What if a settlement is all hunky-dory and then one company gets disgruntled, they leave and move to another settlement? Because the influence is in the company, not the settlement, what happens?
The company loses a limb, essentially. Or rather, the settlement loses a limb.
Well, not only they would lose holdings and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, the settlements will lose the holding or the territory claimed by the company, but the influence loss doesn't really bother the settlement outside of the loss of access to the goods coming in from the holding.
Yeah,
well,
I think
it's kind of, but I mean, it's kind of essential though that you need a company to come back and replace it that has at least that much influence. If you have sort of a budget planned around what you're getting from them.
But what's going to happen now is a company could go out, be a free company, go out, get a whole bunch of stuff besides training, and then actually switching to another settlement. They're very, very wanted, and people will actually start paying essentially for them to switch companies or switch settlements.
Well, what you also have to look out for is pump and dump economic warfare.
What do you mean specifically?
I mean, you get a group of 5 or 6 companies that go in with nefarious intentions to basically boost up a settlement, and then right before a critical moment, like an upcoming war or something, they just drop out and let all of that stuff. They basically cause chaos within the settlement as they're trying to figure out what they need to cut from their budget where in order to make up for their losses.
Well, except for it, just to be clear here, it sounds like companies don't actually have to be a part of the settlement to provide a settlement with resources. Those resources are essentially just goods that can move around the map.
But if that company is part of the settlement in terms of gaining training and whatnot from it, I mean if the company has a holding, like not necessarily the company itself, but if the company owns a holding which is attached to the settlement, then that's DI boosting the settlement right there. And that's huge if the company leaves and that territory is then neutral.
That's interesting. From what I heard, they either have not defined that DI calculation well enough for us to say that, or it just wasn't talked about during this talk.
I just don't think it was talked about.
Well, actually, I have a feeling that the settlement stuff, I actually kind of came out of the questions intentionally, because I don't think we're going to get anything useful there because it's so far out.
Yeah. I mean, they have told us before that DI is related to the hex, because they explained one time, Lee did, that if you have like a mountain hex is going to provide you with more security DI than infrastructure or whatever the other one's called. I know he used morale, but Lee used a different term.
Wasn't there there's security?
It's culture. That's it. Or they call it. They've called it society. Well, actually, no. Society and culture is
economy. I think economy might be the other one.
No, it's
morale.
He used the term morale, but I think it's society, infrastructure, and security are the actual terms that they are using.
Yeah, and I think society is also impacted by your good-evil alignment, and security is impacted by your law-chaos alignment.
Yeah. And so those hexes, those mountain hexes, we talked about, okay, you got a bunch of security from this and you get some infrastructure, but you don't really get society from it. But then on the other hand, if you go to like a lowlands, croplands hex, you get a huge amount of society and infrastructure, but no security.
Right, but it seemed unclear whether companies or well, actually, he did say that companies are claiming hexes. Yeah. But it was not clear how that relates to DI just based on this talk. It seemed kind of fuzzy.
Well, the way it was explained before was that a company goes and claims a holding, and when you claim that holding, you also claim all the territory in that hex for your settlement that the company is attached to, and that provides DI. The other way to provide DI is there'll be 10 tiny slots, like trappings slots. They haven't named them yet for your settlement that will slightly increase your DI. And then, like you said tonight, there's positions for people to be a part of that will increase your DI. They said before that there was 1,000 DI for each of the 3 different DIs, and that each building would require certain amounts of each of those. But with what you asked Hoffman about the slots and whatnot, and that was apparently in flux, and that he had talked to Steven about that again. They might be just redesigning the system a bit.
Yeah, I'm very excited now. Now we've got Tork down. I'm very excited for Steven.
I was kind of surprised to hear updated numbers on the settlements. They were almost double what I remembered them being.
Yeah, right. I thought, I thought like 100, 200 was small, and 400 to 500 was medium, getting to large. 600 to 1,000 is a medium settlement now.
You practically need the whole server to have a large settlement at this point.
Yeah.
I think I understand on Outpost what all of them, what their bulk good is, but what about Glen? I think that's a new one.
It was. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, didn't he say that one wasn't going to make it past the first cut, most likely, anyway?
Yeah. He did, but that seems like rangery, druidy type, woodsy type.
That means it's coming later. It's not in this first group coming up. Glen might be something along the terms of, because how they mentioned in the other blogs that there's going to be outposts that generate more than one resource. Like in the hunting lodge. The hunting lodge generates food and trade goods. So the Glen might be something along those lines. It might, it might be generating wood and trade goods, or wood and food.
I don't know, but they keep talking about this blog post. Hopefully it'll be out tomorrow.
I know, man. I just feel like, oh god, they said it was in the queue, and now they're back to, double checking it again. And
I tried to get Lisa to talk about it, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I get you. The blog on Holdings and Outposts, they've been telling us for about 3 weeks now that it's coming. And it's already been in the queue one time, and they got removed from the queue, and then got put back in the queue again.
Was there a holding that's catered to assassins? He was talking so fast I couldn't write him down so fast, but it seemed like there was one that had an assassin ring to it.
There's a hideout, but that was in his second iteration, which was, he said, slated for past 6 months.
Yes.
All right, so I got Inn, Watchtower, Barracks, Trade Post, Hideout, Manor, Library, Monastery, Shrine, Sanctum, and then he had some double named ones that were also outposts.
I think a ranch.
Yeah, ranch and mine. I think he said twice. He said them in the holding and outpost, which was confusing. So I don't know.
Whenever Pino gets that up, I went ahead and marked down the time. It's at 52 minutes from when Pino started to record. So at 52 minutes is where he names everything.
Is there any reason they're double named, or is it just holding spot for a upcoming name that undecided so far?
Yeah, I think this is just a holding name. Man, there was one question though that we didn't ask, and that they talked about, Stephen and Lee hinted at before, is that when you put down a holding, you can actually use that third slot as an outpost.